They rose before dawn. Chants filled the monastery walls. 200 monks, bound by silence and discipline, lived a life cut off from the world. Then 1 week later, they were gone. No smoke, no blood, no signs of a raid. Just robes scattered in the snow, as if the wearers had dissolved into air. Travelers who stumbled upon the site swore they heard echoes of chanting, though no one remained inside. The doors were locked from within. Bowls of rice sat half-eaten. Candles still burned. The monastery, perched high in the mountains, became a place of whispers. Villagers said the earth swallowed them. Officials said it was abandonment. But what kind of abandonment leaves behind untouched food, unbroken silence, and robes lying empty, as if bodies had slipped out mid-step? Some claimed it was punishment, others a ritual gone wrong. A few even whispered they never left at all. And so we ask, what really happened to the monastery that disappeared into the mountains, along with 200 monks? The monastery had stood for nearly 4 centuries. Built into the rock face of a remote range, it was less a building and more an extension of the mountain itself. Carved staircases wound upward like veins. Chambers hollowed from stone whispered with the weight of countless prayers. Pilgrims who visited spoke of its stillness, so deep it pressed against the chest, as though the mountain itself were listening. The last visitors to see the monks alive described a quiet routine unchanged for generations. Morning chants, hours of meditation, sparse meals. The only sounds were bells echoing against the cliffs. Then came silence. When a trading caravan returned a week later, they found the gates sealed but unguarded. Breaking them open, they stepped into a place frozen in motion. Beds unmade, scrolls scattered as if being read, bowls of water half drunk, yet not a single person remained. The strangest detail was what lay in the courtyard. Rows of robes, neatly arranged in pairs, collapsed as though their owners had vanished mid-step. Some stood upright for moments in the wind before crumpling. No bones, no footprints leading away, only cloth and the faint trace of incense. Officials arrived weeks later, dispatched by regional authorities to investigate. They expected signs of raiders or natural disaster. They found none. The storerooms were untouched. Gold relics remained in plain sight. No evidence of struggle, no blood, not even scattered possessions stolen in haste. Word spread quickly across villages below. Rumors hardened into stories. Some said the monks had ascended in a mass ritual, their souls lifted from their bodies while their garments fell to the earth. Others whispered of an ancient curse, that the mountain demanded lives every century, reclaiming those who dwelt too long in its shadow. But there were stranger theories. A merchant swore he saw faint lights moving across the ridges at night, long after the disappearance. A hunter claimed to hear chanting when no monastery stood in sight. And deep within the archives of nearby temples, a single line was uncovered in an old chronicle. When the mountain breathes, the cloister shall fall silent. The robes, the silence, the uneaten meals, none of it fit into official reports. Authorities declared the monastery abandoned, but villagers would not go near it. Travelers avoided the pass. The mountain had claimed 200 lives, and no one could explain how. The monastery that disappeared was no longer a place of prayer. It became a warning etched into stone. The investigation should have ended. Authorities had declared the case closed, the monastery marked as abandoned, its fate dismissed as superstition. Yet fragments of evidence refused to be buried. A young archivist named Dawa, tasked with cataloging the monastery's remaining scrolls, uncovered something officials had overlooked: a weathered codex hidden behind a false wall in the library. Unlike the usual chants and meditations, this book was different. Its script was jagged, hurried, as though the writer had feared being discovered. Its title, when translated, was chilling: The Chronicle of the Last Chant. Inside were records of strange occurrences long before the disappearance. Monks vanishing one at a time, a novice who walked into the meditation hall and was never seen again, though his sandals remained at the threshold. Voices heard in the stone corridors when no one else was present, the sound of chanting echoing backwards, repeating syllables in reverse. One passage stood out: the mountain calls not with thunder or storm, but with hunger. Each cycle demands its offering. The chosen shall not resist. They dissolve into the breath of stone. Dawa reported his findings, but within days the codex vanished from the archives. Officials denied its existence. The archivist himself was reassigned, then disappeared on his journey to another temple. Rumors spread that he too had been taken, but survivors from nearby villages recalled something else: a procession of monks walking toward the monastery days before the disappearance. 200 figures in saffron robes, but moving in unnatural unison, their steps too perfectly timed. Witnesses swore their eyes looked empty, glazed, as if they were sleepwalking. None of these monks were recognized by villagers who knew the order well. Had there been an exchange? Had the real monks been taken earlier, replaced by something else? Or had they been compelled into a ritual so consuming that their bodies no longer obeyed the laws of flesh? The chronicle hinted at a secret practice, forbidden by the broader monastic orders, a chant that could fracture the boundary between matter and void. It was said to be used not for prayer, but for passage, allowing monks to step into another realm, leaving only their garments behind. A ritual so dangerous it was banned centuries ago, and yet the record suggested this hidden order had preserved it. What could drive them to attempt it? Salvation? Escape? Or was it not their choice at all? The text warned, "Those who hear the reverse chant cannot refuse its call. Their breath aligns with the mountains, and their forms are unmade." Travelers began whispering of nights when the wind carried fragments of impossible syllables, sounds that made the skin crawl and the mind rebel. The villagers who heard them stayed indoors, covering their ears, for fear they too would be claimed. And still, the robes remained, silent proof of bodies erased without violence, without trace. Empty cloth draped across the stones, like shadows of those who walked before. The chronicle may have been destroyed, the archivist may have been silenced, but the echoes it described still lingered in the mountain. And each retelling, each whispered account, asked the same dreadful question. Did the monks choose to vanish, or were they chosen? For years after the disappearance, the monastery remained sealed. Officials forbade entry, citing safety concerns, unstable walls, dangerous terrain, risk of avalanche. But the villagers knew better. They said the ban was not for safety, but for silence, to keep the world from learning what had really happened on that mountain. Decades passed. Time eroded memory, but not the fear. Then in the early 20th century, a group of explorers defied the ban. Scholars, soldiers, and a single journalist climbed the forbidden path to uncover the truth. Their journals, smuggled back down the mountain, offer a glimpse of what they found and why no one ever returned to live there again. The outer gates had collapsed, yet inside the monastery was untouched. Dust layered the floors, but the robes still lay in neat rows. The air was brittle, still charged with something unnatural. One explorer wrote, "We entered a place not abandoned, but waiting." They found the library scattered, but in its depths, beneath the floorboards, was evidence of what the chronicle had hinted, fragments of parchment filled with symbols that did not match any known script. The lines curved into impossible shapes, overlapping in ways that strained the eye. The journalist described staring at a page until the letters seemed to ripple, shifting as if alive. When he looked away, he claimed to still see them burning into his vision. The expedition also uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the prayer hall. The entrance was concealed behind an altar, sealed with iron bolts. Inside, the walls were blackened with soot, though no fire had touched them. At the center lay a massive gong split clean in half, as if struck by something more powerful than steel. Around it were piles of robes, not scattered but stacked deliberately, one upon another, as if hundreds had lain down together and vanished in unison. But what unsettled them most was the sound. The explorers swore that the chamber pulsed faintly with low vibrations, too deep for the ear but heavy in the chest. It felt like a heartbeat. Some fell ill immediately. One soldier vomited blood. The group fled the chamber, but the journalist lingered long enough to hear a single note, like a chant stretched across time, half human, half stone. That night, their camp erupted in chaos. Two of the men wandered from their tents, walking toward the cliffs in trance-like steps. They did not scream when they fell. Their bodies were never recovered. The survivors wrote in their notes that they had heard chanting in their dreams, though none of them spoke the same words. Each awoke repeating syllables they did not understand. Only the journalist returned from the expedition alive. His final article was suppressed by authorities, but his private diary survived. In it, he confessed that the sounds followed him even in the city. He wrote of hearing chanting in the hiss of steam pipes, in the hum of train engines, in the rhythm of his own breath. Weeks later, his neighbors reported that he vanished from his apartment. The door was locked from the inside. All that remained was his robe-like coat folded neatly on the floor. Theories multiplied after this. Some scholars argued the monks had discovered a frequency of sound so resonant it could disrupt matter itself, reducing bodies to nothing while leaving clothing intact. Others believed the monastery sat atop a geological anomaly, a cavern that produced infrasound capable of altering consciousness, driving men to trance and self-destruction. But the villagers clung to the oldest story, the chant of reversal. They believed the monks had invoked it, knowingly or not, and that it had undone them. The sound was not prayer, but devouring. tearing their essence from flesh, consuming it into the mountain. And once released, it could not be contained. Even today, shepherds claim to hear faint voices carried by the wind at night. Some say the chants lure animals off cliffs. Others insist they see robed figures at a distance, walking in lines across ridges where no path exists, disappearing when approached. The robes still lie within the ruins, undisturbed. Travelers who dared to take one never lived long. Illness struck, madness followed, and in every case their garments were later found folded, abandoned, with no body left inside. The monastery remains closed, but the chant, it is not confined. It drifts through stone, through air, through time itself. Once heard, it cannot be unheard. Once remembered, it cannot be forgotten. And that leaves us with the most disturbing question of all. Did the monks truly vanish into nothing? Or did they move somewhere we cannot follow, a place from which their voices still reach back, calling for others to join? The monastery became a scar in the landscape. Authorities tried to erase it from maps, forbidding travelers from approaching. But erasure only deepened fascination. Stories spread further, tales of explorers, wanderers, even thieves who dared to cross the threshold. Few returned, and those who did came back changed. A trader named Norbu stole one of the robes to sell in the markets. Within days, his family said he spoke in whispers that were not his own, syllables no one recognized. At night, he walked barefoot into the snow, staring up at the mountain as though waiting for something. A week later, he vanished. His house was found empty, except for the stolen robe, folded with careful precision at the foot of his bed. A group of soldiers tasked with demolishing the monastery abandoned their mission before they began. Their commander wrote in his log that as they camped below the cliffs, chanting surrounded them, rising and falling like waves. Yet the valley was empty. When dawn came, half the men had disappeared, their weapons scattered across the ground. The commander fled, leaving behind his post. His report was sealed, hidden away in government archives. The monastery itself remained untouched. Attempts to dismantle its walls failed. The stone resisted hammers, resisted fire. Machines broke down without explanation. Even in modern times, engineers who surveyed the site described instruments failing, compasses spinning in circles, recordings corrupted by static. Villagers who lived closest paid the highest price. Livestock wandered off cliffs. Children disappeared from within locked homes. Parents swore they heard chanting through the floors at night, as if the earth itself was singing. Many families abandoned their villages, leaving only ruined houses as proof they once lived there. The curse was no longer contained within the monastery. It seeped outward, a slow, silent contagion of sound and absence. Scholars who studied the phenomenon noted a disturbing pattern. The disappearances seemed to occur in cycles. First a trickle of isolated cases, then silence. Then, decades later, a surge, entire groups vanishing without trace. The monastery had taken its monks in one stroke. Now it seemed to demand offerings in intervals, as if feeding. What terrified investigators most was the precision. Always the same signs: folded garments, untouched possessions, meals left unfinished. Never blood, never struggle, only sudden emptiness. Some began to ask if the monks had not truly perished, but crossed into another realm through their chant. Were they now calling others to join them? Was each disappearance not an accident, but a recruitment? And if so, how many have already answered the call? By the mid-20th century, whispers of the monastery had spread far beyond the mountain valleys. Academics, journalists, and mystics sought to explain it, each shaping the story to their own ends. But beneath all speculation lay a truth too sharp to ignore. The disappearances were not random. In sealed records later leaked by a retired official, a timeline emerged. 167 monks vanished in the 1600s. Another wave, precisely 2 centuries later, took 200 more. A smaller event occurred in the early 1900s, when the explorers lost their men. Then again, in the late 20th century, villagers reported entire families missing, always spaced apart by decades, always accompanied by the same trace: folded garments, as though the body had simply melted out of its skin. The precision was chilling. It resembled a ritual, or worse, a harvest. One researcher charted the dates against lunar and seismic cycles. The pattern aligned not with natural disasters, but with intervals of quiet, periods when the mountains were most still. No quakes, no storms, only silence. It was as if the monastery's hunger grew strongest when the earth was calm, striking in moments of perfect stillness. Witnesses who survived the quiet nights spoke of dreams of walking corridors carved in stone, though they had never been there. Dreams of chanting in languages they did not know, their voices joining hundreds of others. Some awoke with their bed sheets folded neatly at their feet, though they swore they had not touched them. As more stories surfaced, a horrifying possibility emerged. The monks had not merely vanished. They had set in motion a cycle that reached into the present. Every disappearance was not an end, but a continuation, a rhythm echoing through centuries, waiting for its next beat. And perhaps the most disturbing revelation, the cycle was shortening. What had once been centuries between vanishings had now contracted to decades. If the pattern held, another mass disappearance was not centuries away. It was imminent. The question that haunted survivors and scholars alike was no longer why the monastery vanished, but who would be taken next. It began with monks, silent and disciplined, their lives devoted to prayer. It ended with absence. 200 robes lying in the snow, the monastery emptied, as if its people had been erased. That was centuries ago. And yet the silence they left behind never faded. Each retelling sharpened the unease. Authorities called it abandonment. Villagers called it a curse. Scholars called it resonance, vibration, frequency. But none of those explanations erased the truth. The disappearances never stopped. The pattern returned over and over in perfect rhythm. Families, soldiers, wanderers. Always the same signs, always the same outcome. When you look at the records, a dreadful clarity emerges. This was not a single tragedy. It was the beginning of something that moves in cycles, waiting for moments of quiet, waiting for the world to fall still enough to hear the chant again. Some say the monks succeeded, that their chant opened a passage, not to death, but to somewhere else, and that they are still there, walking endless stone corridors, waiting for new voices to join them. Others believe the mountain itself feeds, pulling lives into its hollow depths. But whichever is true, the effect is the same. Those taken do not return. Only their garments remain, folded as if by unseen hands. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you heard silence so complete it pressed against your chest? When was the last time you felt the air hum with a sound you couldn't name? Because the cycle is shortening. What once took centuries now takes decades. And if the rhythm continues, the next vanishing is not far away. It may not be in a remote monastery. It may not even be in the mountains. Perhaps it will begin in a village, a city block, a crowded train station, people gone without a trace, robes replaced by coats, jackets, uniforms, folded neatly where they once stood. The monks were the first. They will not be the last. So when the world falls quiet, when the hum in the silence seems too steady, too deep, listen closely. Is it only the wind, or is it the chant returning again, calling you to follow?